Oh, we just had a fuel leak.
You own the sky. You planned your flight to Oshkosh. You followed the tracks to Fisk. You rocked your wings and turned the base and landed on the disc. Woo!
Toby, that's about how I feel after an epic adventure all the way from Bend, Oregon out to Oshkosh, Wisconsin and back. I learned so much in that 3,000 miles of flying over 26 hours. I have it all right here, and I learned a lot on the way, but there's going to be even more unlocked in this episode as we parse through all the performance data in the Bogey. But first, I wanted to say a quick thank you to Continental Motors for hosting me right on Celebration Way. It's just an honor to be that close to Show Center. More importantly, meeting all of you guys. Thank you for coming out to the meet and greets Tuesday and Thursday, as well as the YouTubers event on Monday. I was honored to be on stage with some of the bigger YouTubers. It was such a blast, and I really apologize to the folks who tried to meet up and we just couldn't. So next year at Airventure, we'll see what happens if I fly the Bogey again or not. I wanted to leave a quick montage of some of the footage that I took out there, and then we'll get into the debrief. Let's go.
That's a good rock highway. I'm taking you 27 as well. Railroad tracks northbound on 118.5. They're fast and good.
Recognize him without a stash, but that kind of gives it away. Hey, it's Steve. Welcome back to Clear Direct. So the Backcountry Bogey has 82 hours on it now. And obviously we started with flight tests. We did a bunch of backcountry flying in Idaho. And then now this big long trip to Oshkosh, which is an opportunity to gain all sorts of performance data for the Bogey. Sure, I did basic performance data. I wrote the POH, the AOH for the Bogey with performance data, but I can really refine that with all the data we're going to go through now. So let's get into it. The route, if we were just to take, the great circle distance to Oshkosh and back, would have been 2,806 nautical miles, but Rocky Mountains. So we had to take a routing north, and then different reasons why I went north and then south, but it's 3,012 miles was the actual flown route. So that's a difference of 206 miles. So we started off on the north route, Missoula, Billings, Mobridge, South Dakota, and then Anoka County, just north of the Twin Cities, on into Oshkosh. And then on the way back, we went through Luverne, Minnesota, then to Scottsbluff, Nebraska, and then flew all the way over Wyoming, and then got gas in the southeast corner of Idaho, which that is Bear Lake County in Paris, Idaho, and then into Boise, drop off my son, and then around some TFRs back to Bend. you can see the statute miles on the second bullet there, and then the third bullet, of course, that's kilometers. So 26.2 hours airborne, and we burned 225 gallons of 100 low lead. So on the engine, we put on 28.3 hours, talked about the flight time. So that gave us a ground time of 2.1 hours. That was mostly spent taxiing in at Oshkosh. We landed 2-7, and then we had to taxi all the way to south of the tower and then shut down right at Boeing Plaza. And then they towed us back in to the location on Celebration Way at the Continental booth. Speaking of the Oshkosh arrival, the Fisk arrival, I had a 360 cam going inside the cockpit. I'll put a general consumption reframed video, and then I'll also do a 360 video so you can put on your goggles if you're into that sort of thing and look around the cockpit during the Fisk arrival, rocking the wings and landing on the green dot. So look for that coming soon. Super fun. The other thing that ran up the ground time is it went IFR because of smoke at Boise, so I spent a lot of time just kind of running on the ground there. Otherwise it would have been a lot more efficient. Speaking of efficiency, the average fuel flow was 8 gallons per hour. Pretty darn happy with that. Now the best leg was 6.8 gallons per hour. That was the final leg into Oshkosh, probably because, you know, you got to fly 90 knots for a bit of time on the Fisk arrival. So I'm not burning too much gas doing that. And then the worst leg was 8.6, and that was with a ton of headwind from Luverne, Minnesota into Scottsbluff, Nebraska. So for the average miles per gallon, we'll do all this in statute miles since kind of people compare it to cars. So I converted nautical miles to statute miles. 15.4, pretty dang good for an average MPG. I mean, that's actually pretty mind-blowing considering the fact that you're going 140, 135 miles an hour. More on the speeds here in a second. So the best leg was going from Bend to Missoula. So we're up high. We had a nice tailwind, 18.1, but we paid the piper on the way back, bucking that headwind from Boise to Bend. 13.4 statute miles per gallon. The moment everybody is waiting for. A little bit disappointing here. So the average airborne speeds, right? So I took out any sort of ground time, and the average airborne speed was 115 knots and then 132 miles per hour. So the best leg was 125 knots or 144 miles per hour. That was Bend to Missoula with that tailwind. And then, of course, that worst leg, Boise to Bend, 106 knots, only 122 miles per hour. The highest instantaneous speed I saw was on that Bend to Missoula, 141 knots, 162 miles per hour. Clearly that was on a descent. But we're going to get a lot into cylinder head temperatures, and that's, you know, the main reason why I'm not seeing the published RANs, you know, cruise speeds of 150, 155 miles per hour. Yeah, of course, I'm able to get up there in a descent, but I'm not able to sustain that. And again, more on that in the end of this video. So stay tuned. All right, the scariest moment was at Luverne, Minnesota, and it was on the ground. It was after I fueled up. I'm trying to find our lunch to make some PB&Js, and I was moving things around, and it was after we fueled up. My son goes, Dad. I'm like, hang on. He's like, no, Dad, look. And I look out. At the tail of the bogey was a puddle of liquid, and I'm like, oh, we just had a fuel leak. And Luverne, Minnesota, it's a little bit east of Rapid City, but it's pretty isolated out there. And so I was thinking we might be stuck. I reached down, I touched the fluid, I smelled it. There's no strong smell of 100 low lead. Must be water. Where's that water come from? Turns out I had like tipped over my cooler and it kind of drained in the baggage compartment, and I was never so happy to have a water spill in my bogey as when I realized that it wasn't 100 low lead. So we were on our way. But that's pretty good for that being the scariest moment of all this flying. Coolest small FBO or small airport, that was Mobridge, South Dakota. It was right on the Missouri River, I believe, right as you cross into the central time zone. Kind of a cool little airport, cool FBO. So thanks to the airport manager for a really cool experience. There was nobody there, but we had all we needed to get fuel and air conditioning and a quick PB&J sandwich, and off we were going. Runner-up was Luverne, Minnesota, kind of out in the cornfields there. Is really nice. Now the quickest gas stop goes to Bear Lake County, Paris, Idaho. Man, and the reason is because you're saving all this potential energy. We're cruising at like 8,500 feet. All we had to dip down was to 5,900 feet and land, and then that saves a ton of time climbing up as well. So again, you're just kind of preserving that potential energy. So I really like that pretty area too, as you're just kind of finishing the big stuff of the Rocky Mountains. Okay, so the power plant is a Continental Titan XIO 340, 180 horsepower, turning a 82-inch Cub ground adjustable carbon prop. And I have it adjusted to 16.5 degrees pitch right now. And of course, I'm running dual light speed plasma 3 ignition, electronic ignition boxes. I've got a backup battery in case there's an issue with my battery or alternator. And now we're going to talk the issues. So the CHTs, primarily CHTs 2 and 4, but really CHT 4. I did some work. I knew I had a high CHT 4, cylinder 4 was always running high, so I did a lot of work pre-Oshkosh of sealing baffles with RTV silicone and filling gaps, and that really, really did help. And it actually brought cylinder head temperature 4, cylinder 4 down, brought 2 up a little bit, which is okay, but I still have a really cold cylinder, which is cylinder 1, and then 3 is about a little bit warmer than 1. So I'll get into the fixes. I know you're probably thinking what I'm thinking right now, dams and stuff, but we'll get into the other stuff here. But let's just talk about what I was dealing with and how I flew based upon having some high cylinder head temperatures in the summertime with high gross weights. So pretty much all of these stats, I'm at gross weight or slightly below. I'll show you my weight and balance here in a second. But for this motor, the CHT caution is 425 Fahrenheit, and then the red line is 475, which is a stark difference from my Continental IO 520 I fly in my Bonanza. It's got constant speed prop, and it's also got cowl flaps so you can open and close. So I'm routinely flying well below 380. I do something different if I'm seeing above 360. So this is a big difference. I don't even know what the red line is in the Bonanza. I never get close to it, but I treat the red line in the Bonanza as like 380. So this is kind of hard for me to deal with in the 400s range, but they say it's okay. The max CHT I saw on this trip was 447, and it was kind of at the top of the climb. We're actually going to get into the hard data on this in 1 second. And that was on the leg from Scottsbluff, Nebraska into Idaho. So let's talk about what I typically did in climb and cruise, and then we'll get into the fixes. High CHTs, they would start climbing on takeoff. I'd be full rich or just lean of full rich, full power on takeoff, of course. I'd see the cylinder head temperatures climb of cylinder 4 above 400, so I'm watching it, and I'd kind of keep it at full rich and wide open throttle, or just shy of full rich. I typically was shooting for about 1350 on the EGT, and I know it varies, but 1350 is a good starting place to go for a good rich of peak number for EGTs. But then as I'm climbing out, I'd see about 425, and then I'd have to do something different, right? I would climb out at typically about 80 to 85 knots indicated. Sometimes I'd nose over, get some more airspeed, but that wouldn't help. Even 90 knots. After 90 knots, I'm not climbing very much. And so I'd have to either go lean of peak, which I don't like climbing in lean of peak. You're not getting a ton of power. So the only other option really at that point is to back off the manifold pressure, pull in the throttle. So I was still able to eke out a climb once my cylinder head temperatures got above 425 in the caution range at gross weight at high density altitudes. I was pretty happy about that. I'd see about between 300 and 400 feet per minute. So not great, but I was still climbing. So that's typically what I did until I got to climb. And then I'd keep it there until I sped up a little bit. And then I would go wide open throttle again. And then I'd go straight to lean of peak. And that would settle down the cylinder head temperatures to about a happy 410 degrees. Okay. So that was kind of my routine that I got used to doing. There were times when I deviated from that. As far as the RPM goes, with 16.5 degrees on the pitch, climbing at about 85 knots, I'd see about 2,400 RPM. And then I'd go wide open throttle, pitch the nose over. If I went wide open throttle, rich of peak, level flight, I'd be pretty much at max RPM, which is 2,700 RPM. So I'd be about 2,650 or so. And I don't like being up there because it's just hard on the prop, hard on the engine. And if you hit a gust or something, you're going to overspeed right away. So, but that's kind of what I would get with the 16.5 degree pitch prop. Additionally, though, the cylinder head temperatures would keep climbing. I wouldn't have enough patience to watch them climb past 450. As you can see, I never saw above 450 because that's just too close to the red line for me. But I don't know if they'd stabilize at 450 or if they'd keep climbing the red line. I don't know. I wasn't willing to find out. Then when I go wide open throttle and then lean of peak, the cylinder head temperatures would slowly decrease to about 410 or so for cylinder 4, I should say. And then my RPM would come down to about 2,500, 2,550 or so. So nice, comfortable RPM and good, pretty efficient RPM for that prop. For cruise, I pretty much hit that. I would just leave it in wide open throttle, lean of peak, and be pretty happy there. But let's look into how I kind of analyzed this data. And Savvy Aviation here, you know what I'm going to do is I will leave a link in the description to this actual flight. You can actually go and manipulate this data and look at it and back me up if I'm wrong. You know, mess with this data and give me feedback. But what I'm going to take a look at here, I've got 2 tabs of this open, same flight, but there's the second tab. First tab, we're looking at CHT and fuel flow. Second chart down here, we're looking at vertical speed, so you can see my climb rate, and then engine power, the percent that engine power is generating. On this other one, I really wanted to pull up the EGTs because that's what we're leaning based upon, and see how tight my EGTs are. So they're not gammy injectors, they're just Continental, but they're pretty well matched. So I was pretty happy with the leaning process. They all kind of peaked at roughly the same time. So, and it ran really well lean of peak. I could, if I got a gust of wind and I was in a descent or something and the prop was about to overspeed, I'd just lean it out and then I would bring the RPM down. But really I want to focus on this tab because here's the CHTs that we're talking about. And here's the highest temperature I got, 447 on the entire trip. So I wanted to kind of analyze this and see what's going on. So let's kind of zoom in. Clearly we're climbing out of, and if you just kind of pause over that, you can see where you are in the world. Is Carmen San Diego here. Just climbing out of Nebraska, heading towards the Rockies right there into Wyoming. Cool morning. Nice smooth air. It's beautiful. But let's try to analyze to see what I did. So we just zoomed in and there it is, cylinder head temperature of cylinder 4, 447 before it comes back down. So there's a spike. There's something that changed. So that's fuel flow. So I clearly was lean a peak and then pushed the mixture back into 10.7 on the fuel flow. Let's see what that does to the engine power. So the engine power is this goes up to 65% engine power, vertical speed. So I'm just kind of finishing a climb right here because my vertical speed kind of peaks there and then kind of settles off right there. Let's just check what my altitude is so you can see all the things I have available to me. There's density, indicated, and pressure. So let's just go indicated altitude. Yep, so I'm leveling off at 8,500 feet. Okay, so that's what you can look at. There's something here. It looks like I went from lean of peak to rich of peak for just a moment, and I could see why I did that is probably maybe I fell off the back end of the power curve. I hit a gust and I started getting too slow. I don't want to spend the time to get into the details, but that's why I'd maybe go rich of peak for just a moment. You can see the cylinder head temperatures drastically rise. Got up to 436 again before I went lean of peak to cool them back down. But you can see here throughout this, I was below the caution level. So 423, 424. Was my highest cylinder. This was the warmest flight, or at least for these cylinders. So good. So that's kind of showing you there. And then back over to this tab right here. Here's the EGTs as I'm leaning. So I'm rich of peak here. And you can see me leaning it out. A lot of the times, Mike Bush calls it the big pull. I got to know my EGTs that I was looking for and the feel of the engine and the RPM that it would generate, that I wouldn't spend a lot of time in that red corner, that coffin corner, right? That right at that peak to find what the peak is. I just pull right through it and go to lean of peak. So if you're looking through my data and you're going, that doesn't look like a smooth leaning out, it's because I'm doing the big pull. That looks like a pretty rapid change right there. So I think I did the big pull. So cool. So let me know in the comments if you have any questions on how to manipulate that data. And again, I'll put the link. I'll make it publicly available and you can kind of mess with it. And as well as I encourage you to look at all the other stuff you can get too. You know, you can see what the autopilot is doing, how much amps I'm generating. So really fun stuff for nerds like me. So the fixes, what can I do in the future to work on my CHT? Okay, I can mess with the pitch of the propeller. Another cooling option is to put a small dam in front of cylinder 1, like you see here from my friend Pat Hatch. And that'll bring cylinder 1's temperature up, sharing the love and cooling off the other 3 cylinders. I can laminate the exhaust flow. And what I mean by that, thank you, Jeff from Aerosport Products. He rolled me this piece of aluminum. I can install this at the bottom of my firewall because there is a little lip that's causing some turbulent airflow. And a lot of people have had good success with just laminating that airflow, making it smoother out the exhaust to make your cooling more effective. So that's something that I can try. I can increase my trip lip size and see if that helps too, to increase the negative pressure below the cowling. But something I'm very curious about, I had a conversation with an interesting gentleman who has a Rans S21 who flies with a higher horsepower engine. I can't remember what engine, but I think he quoted me about 195 horsepower. And he was having huge CHT issues as well. And his big solution was to talk to Klaus, who's the Lightspeed ignition guy, and gave him a new timing ring. But that solved his issues. Probably sacrificed a little bit of power, I guess, but as long as your engine, cylinder head temperatures are in check, now you can go wide open throttle, rich of peak, and generate more horsepower. And when I'm doing this wide open throttle lean of peak, so generating 67, 66, so let's quick math, 180 horsepower, 2/3 of that is 121 horsepower. So if I were to go rich of peak, I'd be in the 3/4, depending on my altitude and temperature and all that good stuff. So I would love to solve this issue. So let me know in the comments if I'm missing something and how I can mess with my timing. One technique I have heard is you disconnect the manifold pressure to the ignition boxes, and then now it can't fine tune itself and run real hot, and it retards the timing, I think, a little bit without knowing exactly the manifold pressure. And so at least that'd be a good experiment to see what I can do. All right, let's take a look at what other data I kind of looked at, weight and balance, and then planning versus reality. Here's a quick look at my weight and balance for the trip. So gross weight was about 0.6 pounds underneath max gross weight. So again, no kidding, we are heavy. So that's one thing that you got to keep in mind with all these performance numbers. I'm not always flying at max gross weight. This airplane can carry 700 plus pounds of useful load, which is awesome, as well as 50 gallons of fuel. So that really helped. And you can see that I never really pushed the fuel. Here's my chart of pretty much everything. You can pause it and take a look for yourself. But here's my planned fuel burn. And I wanted to keep track of what the planned fuel burn on Foreflight is versus my actual fuel burn to see if I needed to tweak my performance numbers within Foreflight. And I think at Oshkosh, I tweaked it a little bit and got a lot closer to variances. So the average variance was almost only off by 1.1 gallons per flight. Okay, here's another interesting thing. Here's the planned Foreflight time, which does take into consideration winds. And then the flight times I got off of FlightAware, because I'm just tracking engine time. The Garmin just tracks engine time unless there's a feature I don't know about. And then I track the discrepancy between planned time and the FlightAware flight time. And it wasn't too bad. I think I tweaked it once again and got it pretty darn close. So I'm really happy with how Foreflight is planning for me with my current performance information for the Bogey. But there it is, average ground speed in knots, average ground speed in miles per hour, highest ground speeds, slowest ground speeds, highest CHT. So guys, 132 miles per hour for the entire trip. The reason I'm not talking about true airspeed as recorded by my Garmin system is because I don't quite trust it. I suspect a small leak in the pitot-static system that I still need to run down. Suffice to say that the true airspeed is a bit pessimistic, and so in a no-wind situation, it shows me with a tailwind. I'll go into more detail on this in a future episode. Do I think that I had a higher headwind component headed west versus a tailwind going east? I think possibly, but I just think that I'm not getting the performance, A, because I was heavyweight, and then B, because of the cylinder head temperature issues. But I'm pretty happy overall. I could probably have done 1 or 2 less fuel stops because I'm not pushing the Bogey as far as it can. Again, it's got a 50 gallon. I consider it 48 usable, and I'm only burning, my max fuel burn on a leg was like 28 right there, and that was kind of the longest leg without a tailwind, right? So 28 gallons. So shoot, I'm barely burning just over my half my fuel, and so you could stretch out these legs. But again, I'm flying with my 12-year-old son, and it was just felt good to get out of the aircraft. As far as the ergonomics, pretty happy. Again, leg room is pretty good. I find that my left leg leans against the door knob. At least it's not sharp, but it is a kind of a small hard plastic thing that kind of digs into my shin a little bit. So I got to figure out something there. I think I'm going to upgrade the door handles to the newer metal door handles in the future. But overall, the airflow was good in the cockpit. The CO was low. There was very little carbon monoxide floating around. So couldn't be happier. It was fun. I'm going to leave this one here. That's a lot of data. What's coming up next, though, is more into the flight test, as well as more Idaho backcountry flying before winter. So super excited for all that stuff. Thanks for joining. I'm Steve. Until next time, you're clear direct.